Today, I'll be doing predictions for the two biggest games of Week 11 of this college football season. So I'll be starting with the biggest game of the week, Georgia at Ole Miss. So this is a big game because Ole Miss has to win this game to keep their college football playoff hopes alive. If they do win this game, they become very likely to make it, with their remaining games being against Florida and Mississippi State, which will be almost sure wins for them. And for Georgia, if they lose this game, I still think they will probably end up getting in the college football playoff if they win the rest of their games, which I think they will do. But it wouldn't be a guarantee. So I'm gonna go ahead and tell you before I put my score prediction up who I think is gonna win this game. I think that Georgia will win this game, even though I'm an Ole Miss fan. Uh, and Ole Miss is better at certain positions than they were last year when they got blown out by Georgia. But the biggest reason why I think Georgia will win is coaching. Kirby Smart is a much better coach than Lane Kiffin is, and I just don't trust Lane Kiffin to beat him. Kirby Smart always has his team ready for these big games. And Lane Kiffin has improved a lot as a coach since he first got to Ole Miss. And he hadn't really gotten any wins against good teams before last year, where he did get two wins against good teams, but he still doesn't have a win yet against an elite came. So at quarterback in this game, I think that even though Carson Beck was a better quarterback than Jackson Dart was last year, Ole Miss is now better at quarterback than Georgia. I would rather right now have Jackson Dart on my team at quarterback than Carson Beck. So Jackson Dart has improved since he first got to Oxford. In 2022, he was around average or maybe a little bit above average of a quarterback. And in 2023, he became a very good quarterback, but not a quarterback that I would have called elite. But now he is an elite quarterback. I would say that right now, Jackson Dart is probably the second best quarterback in the country behind Dylan Gabriel. And I know I've made some jokes about Carson Beck because of his turnovers, but I'm still high on Carson Beck as a quarterback. I still think that he's probably going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL someday. But if even if a talented quarterback like him is the same as he was last year, except for throwing a few interceptions in a game like he wasn't doing last year, it can still make a big difference. But Georgia's team deserves a lot of credit for how they've been able to do, even when he has been turning the ball over a lot. Like in the Texas game, it's amazing that Georgia was able to go on the road and beat them really dominantly when he threw three interceptions. And in the Alabama game, it was impressive that even though he turned the ball over four times, they were able to put themselves in a position to have a chance to win that game at the end. And those turnovers were probably costly ones. So Georgia has had a lot of slow offensive starts this season, but I don't expect that to be the case in this game. I think they'll be ready for this game on both sides of the ball. So at wide receiver, I saw that Trey Harris for Ole Miss is still not expected to play in this game. That obviously hurts. And I also saw that Jordan Watkins, who set the school record last week, is also not expected to play. And I didn't even know Watkins was hurt, but that is a huge bad thing for the Ole Miss wide receiver room. Harrison Watkins are their two best receivers. Now they do still have Juice Wells and Caden Lee, who are uh, good receivers. And for Georgia at wide receiver, Dominic Lovett is one of the best receivers in the SEC. And Dylan Bell has done a nice job for Georgia at wide receiver in his first year as a starter. But one of Georgia's receivers, Colby Young, is suspended. And then at tight end, I saw Ole Miss's Caden Prescorn, who didn't play last Saturday, is expected to play in this game. And also their backup tight end, Daquan Wright, who filled in for Prescorn last Saturday, did a very nice job catching 9 passes for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think they should try to use him too in this game, even if Caden Prescorn is able to play. And Georgia had a tight end advantage over Ole Miss last season, but that isn't the case this season. Ole Miss has the tight end advantage. Georgia's tight ends have not been very good this year. But at wide receiver, if Harris and Watkins are both out, I don't really think Ole Miss will have an advantage over Georgia, even though Georgia isn't really loaded at wide receiver. But at running back, Georgia, I think, has the advantage. Even though their running back room has a bunch of injuries. So Georgia's starting running back Trevor Etienne, I saw is questionable to play in this game after missing last week's game. But if I had to guess, I would say he will play in this game. But I have been wrong about making those kind of predictions before. But Georgia does have two other running backs that are injured. So if ETN doesn't play, it will be a true freshman running back, Nate Frazier, making the start again at running back for Georgia. And he did do a pretty good job at running back for them last week, rushing for 82 yards and a touchdown on 19 carries. And he's done a pretty good job for them this season. So Ole Miss's starting running back Henry Parrish was injured last week against Arkansas, and it was a pretty bad injury. And I saw he will be out for this game. But I really don't think that is going to hurt Ole Miss. Parrish has been struggling badly since Ole Miss has been playing SEC opponents. And Ole Miss hasn't had an explosive play from a running back since Ulysses Bentley's 50-yard touchdown run against LSU, and they're badly going to need to get some big runs in this game to win. And I don't really think they will be able to get them. So I guess with Parrish out, it will probably be Ulysses Bentley making the start for Ole Miss at running back in this game. And at the line of scrimmage, Georgia had a huge advantage over Ole Miss on both sides last year. They dominated Ole Miss at the line of scrimmage last year. So Ole Miss has improved a lot on the defensive line since that game last year, but I don't think they've improved on the offensive line. I think the Ole Miss defensive line is about as good as the Georgia defensive line, and I think the Ole Miss defensive line can match the Georgia offensive line. Now, I don't think that they can dominate the Georgia offensive line because Georgia's offensive line is still very good, but I think that the Georgia defensive line is going to dominate the Ole Miss offensive line like it did last year and like they did against Texas. I do think that Georgia's offensive line is much better still than Ole Miss's offensive line. So Ole Miss's offensive line, I thought last week did better with their pass protection, but they were still awful with their run blocking. And I'm very afraid that Jalen Walker and Michael Williams are going to be all over Jackson Dart in this game. But Ole Miss's whole front seven, line and linebackers, is I think about as good as Georgia's is now. So Georgia's best linebacker, Smile Munden, I saw is questionable to play in this game after missing the last couple of games. And both teams at strength on defense, their biggest strength is stopping the run. But Ole Miss's secondary, I still don't think is that good. And Georgia's secondary is really good. So I think that Ole Miss is going to have a hard time stopping Carson Beck, and Georgia. I do think will give up some big pass plays from Jackson Dart, but I think they'll be able to cover Ole Miss's receivers better than Ole Miss will be able to cover the Georgia wide receivers. But Ole Miss is fifth in the country this year in sacks. They have 41 sacks this season. So I do think that this game will be much closer than it was last year. I think that Ole Miss will be able to get more stops on Georgia this year, but I still don't think that Ole Miss will be able to score a lot on Georgia because of how their offensive line is. I think that it'll be competitive and probably close for most of the game, but I think Georgia will pull away late and win by a couple of scores. I've got Georgia getting the win at 31 to 17 over Ole Miss, which would that mean they would have beat the spread by quite a bit because they're only a 2-point favorite against Ole Miss. So now Alabama at LSU. So at coaching in this game, I'd give the advantage to LSU, having Brian Kelly, a very experienced head coach who has won so many games, and Alabama has Kalen DeBoer, who I know has won everywhere that he's been, but it seems to be letting one of his players be the real head coach. And at quarterback in this game, if you're gonna go by who was a better passer, I would say Garrett Nussmeier is a better, and that is usually what you would go by if you're going to decide who has the better quarterback. But if you include running in it too, I think they're about even because Jalen Milrow is a much better runner than Garrett Nussmeier is, and I would say that's concerning for LSU because of how badly they struggled to stop Texas A&M's quarterback or runs. And at wide receiver, Alabama has the best receiver in this game, Ryan Williams, a very good receiver. But LSU has more options at wide receiver that are good than Alabama does. So I would give them the overall advantage in this game at wide receiver. Tyron Lacey and Aaron Anderson have done a great job for LSU at receiver this season, and LSU has a big tight end advantage with Mason Taylor, who is playing the best he's ever played in college this season. He's become like another great wide receiver for uh, them. And at running back, though, I would give Alabama the advantage. They're deeper than LSU. LSU's running back room just is not very good this season. Alabama has, though, not been as good at running back as I would have thought they would have been. But Justice Haynes did finally have a pretty good game against Missouri a few weeks ago, having a 79 yards and a touchdown on 8 carries. And on the line of scrimmage, at the offensive line, I would give LSU probably a little bit of an advantage. LSU, though, will be without their starting left guard in this game. But Alabama's offensive line hasn't been as good as I would have thought it would have been, but it's still a solid. And then on the defensive line, I'd probably give Alabama a little bit of an advantage, but LSU's turned into a very solid defensive line. And at linebacker, I'd say both teams are even. LSU's Whit Weeks and Greg Penn combination is really good, and so is Alabama's Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell linebacker combination. And in the secondary, both teams are not very good. And Alabama's going to be without their other starting safety. Uh, Besides their head coach, Keon Sabb. And I do think that LSU is going to benefit a little more from going against a weak secondary than Alabama will, because I think they have a better passer and a better wide receiver room. But I do think that Jalen Milrow will be able to make some big throws to Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard in this game. And LSU being a more of a passing team than Alabama is, Alabama's more of a running team. I think will also benefit LSU in this game. And LSU being the home team is obviously going to be a big advantage to them in this game. So I do think that this game will be close, but I think LSU will get the win. I've got them winning 34 to 27 over Alabama. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.